Before we get too deep into modeling, let's practice some of what we learned in the Blender basics. In this lesson, we'll just stick to object mode, but make a little snowman that will use a lot of the tools that we learned in that course. The main part of the snowman is, of course, 3 big snowballs stacked on top of each other. So for that, I'll go ahead and first delete the default cube, and then go to the Add menu, down to Mesh, and let's choose a UV sphere. Now, we're not going to get super detailed with this, so this amount of polygons is perfectly fine, but I do want it to at least look a little bit smoother. So for that, I'll right-click and choose Shade Smooth. Then let's make sure that this is at least roughly the right size. Snowmen can be all different shapes and sizes, but let's say this snowball is about 3 feet. So I'll open up the sidebar by either hitting N or using this little arrow on the top right of the 3D view. And down under dimensions, we can see that it's 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. While the metric system makes way more sense, as an American, it's not super intuitive to me. So instead, I'm going to drag down on all of these and instead type in 3 FT for feet. And then it'll do all of that conversion for me, so I don't have to worry about it. But we can also go into the Scene tab, go down to Units, and if we want, we can switch this to Imperial. But of course, you can leave yours at metric if you'd like. Next, I'll take this snowball and move it up so it's sitting on the ground. I'll take my Move tool and just move it up along the Z-axis. And I'll leave some of it sticking through the ground so it looks like it has weight and is really squished on top of it. Then I'll rename this in the outliner to Snowball. And to make a simple ground plane, I'll hit Shift-A to get the Add menu, and then go to Circle. Then I'll look at the Redo panel in the bottom left, or you can always hit the hotkey F9 to bring that up anywhere else. I'll make that a bit bigger, let's say somewhere around 5 feet, and switch the fill type from Nothing to Ngon. And I'll bump up the resolution just a little bit and set the vertices to 64. All right, then with this still selected, I'll hit F2 in the 3D view, and that'll allow me to rename it without going to the outliner, and I'll call this Ground. Then I'll hit N to hide the sidebar, since we probably won't need that for a little bit. Then I'll take this main snowball here, and then hit Shift-D to duplicate it, and then that'll do a duplicate and move. So if I move my mouse, it'll move around the new object, but then I can hit Z and constrain that movement to the Z-axis. I'll move this up slightly, and then left-click to confirm. Then I can also hit S and scale that down, and again, left-click to confirm. Then I'll do that one more time, Shift-D, Z to move it along the Z-axis. I'll move this one up a little bit higher just so it looks like his head is more rounded, then left-click to confirm, S, and scale this down. Okay, that looks like a good start to our snowman. Also kind of looks like one of those chewing dog toys. But to start to give him a face, let's make a little carrot for his nose. If I add it right now, it'll add it to the center of the world, but it would be a lot more convenient if it was already stuck to the center of his face. So what I'll do is I'll just look at this from front view, and then shift right click to place the 3D cursor right in the middle of his face. You could also do that with the 3D cursor tool over in the toolbar. If we do it this way, then one thing that we can do is switch the orientation from view to geometry, and then when we place the 3D cursor, it's going to line up with wherever it is on the surface. So I'll just place that right in the middle of his face here, and then Shift-A, Mesh, and Cone. Now in the Redo panel, I can switch the Align from World to 3D Cursor, and now it's already pointing in the right direction. Though it's a little off-center, so I'll take my Move tool and move that over a bit, or go into Top View, and rotate this and move it into place. If we wanted to, we could go to our Object Properties and set this all to be exact values, but I don't mind if this is a little bit off because no snowman is perfect. I'll go ahead and scale this down and move this out, and then also scale it along the Y-axis to make it a little bit longer and more like a carrot. So S to scale, S and Y to scale along the Y-axis, and move it into place. And maybe I'll tilt it just a little bit down. Okay, now for this one, if I right-click and shade smooth, then it's going to look a little bit weird towards the base. And that's because there's only one edge that separates the bottom from the sides, and there's a really extreme angle difference between those faces. And so blending between them gives us this really overly darkened and kind of extreme result. So what we want to do for things where we do want a sharp edge is we can right click and instead choose Shade Auto Smooth. What that's going to do if you have Blender 4.2 or later is it's going to add a modifier for smooth by angle. So instead of having to manually mark edges as sharp in edit mode, that'll do it for us automatically based on the angle of all of our edges here. So that's going to fix the shading there towards the bottom, and I can move that back into his face. All right, now let's add some buttons for his eyes. Again, I'll take the 3D cursor and just place one right there. Shift A, Mesh, and Cylinder. Let's align that to the 3D cursor. And we could change the radius here to be much smaller. I'll hold down Shift while I'm doing this to work in smaller increments, and also change the depth. Okay, that works pretty well. Now for this next one, we could either mirror it over and make it exact, and the way to do that would be to Shift D, duplicate, and I hit Escape there to cancel the move operation, but the duplicate still worked. So as long as I have this duplicate cylinder selected, I can go to Object and Mirror and choose X Global, and that'll flip it around like so, and I can move that along the X-axis and move that into place. Or what you could also do if you wanted to place this somewhere else and not perfectly on the other side is you could, let me switch back to my selection tool. You could select this and then turn on snapping. And then under the snapping settings, go to face snapping. So that now if I move this around, it's going to snap it to whatever face is under my cursor. But then also I can turn on align rotation to target. So now it'll be aligned with whatever's under my cursor. But it's also snapping currently the nearest vertex, but I want it to snap the center of the object origin. So I'll choose center as the snap base. Now if I move this around, I can place this anywhere on the surface really easily. So then I can just hit Shift D and move this over to the other side. And he can be a little lopsided. All right, then I'll go ahead and turn off snapping because that can be a little bit confusing if you forget to turn that off. And I'll go ahead and name these objects. First we have our cone. I'll hit F2 to rename that to nose. And then for this cylinder on the right, or our right, his left, I'll hit F2 and name this to I_L. And this one, F2, I_R for right. Okay, and now to make editing these things a little bit easier, I'll set up a parenting hierarchy. So I'll hold down Shift and select both the eyes and the nose. And then while continuing to hold Shift, I'll select the head last to make sure that it's the active object. And then go to Object, Parent, and choose Object. Now in the outliner, the eyes and the nose are grouped under the snowball.002, which we can also rename to head, just like so. And then when I select that, I can move it around, rotate it, do whatever I need to, and the eyes and the nose are going to follow along. After that, let's move down and parent the main section of his body or the middle section to the base. But this time, instead of going all the way to the object menu, I'm just going to use the hotkey Control P to parent. Set parent to object, just like so. So now I can move this around. Oh, it looks like we did not parent the head to the middle. So again, Control P, set parent to object. Okay, I should have tested it first, but the head works, the middle works, and the base works. Awesome, now let's give him a bit of a hat, and I'll set the cursor back to the center so that the newly created hat will be right in the middle. And I'll go to Object, Snap, and Cursor to World Origin to bring that back to the middle. And then I can hit Shift A, Mesh, and Cylinder. Now this is going to add it as really, really small because that's the last values that we used for the eyes. So I'll set this back to a radius of 1 and a depth of 2, which I believe were the defaults. And then I'll just hit G and then Z and move this up and scale it down just a little bit. And put that right on top of his head. Kind of looks like a chef snowman right now. But then I can just take this and then also hit Shift D to duplicate that, and then I'll hit S to scale it, and then hit Z to constrain that scaling to the Z axis. So I'll just flatten this down here quite a bit. Then I'll go back to my move tool and move this down and scale that out to give them a little bit of a brim. And I'll maybe scale this up a little bit along the Z axis with S and Z just to make it a little bit thicker. And place it right there. Okay, now I'll call the top one hat, and the second one hat brim. I'll take the hat and parent it to the brim by selecting the hat first and then shift selecting the brim, and then Control P to parent to object. And then I'll take the brim, shift select the head, Control P, parent to object. All right, now I can rotate the hat around his head by double tapping R if I want to. Or if I move the head, it follows along. All right, lastly for the hat, I'll just take both of these objects, right click and shade auto smooth. Now I think it needs some sort of arms, so I'll hit Shift A, add mesh, and let's just add a cube here. We haven't used any cubes yet. Then I'll go into front view by hitting 1 on my number pad. And I'll scale this down to be pretty small, and then S and then Z to scale this along the Z axis to make a stick, and then just rotate this into place. These can be pretty basic. And then I'll take this one, Shift D and rotate it a little bit more, scale it down, and place it off to the side. Now I want this one to be a little less long, but if I try to scale this along the Z axis or any of the other, the X or the Y axes, it's not really going to work. But that's because we're in global space. Remember, we can also switch over from global to local space over in the 3D view header. And now our Z axis is aligned with our cube. So then I can hit S and then Z and very easily make this a bit shorter. So I'll make a couple of these, again by hitting Shift D to duplicate, R to rotate, and then S and Z to make it longer or shorter. So there's one side here. Then I'll take all of these, Shift D, and rotate them around. And I'll just change it up a bit here. Just like so. And then maybe make one more really small one. Shift D, rotate, S and Z. And there we have a couple sticks. Since these are all labeled cube, what I'll do is select all of them here, and then we can rename them all at the same time by going to Edit and Batch Rename, and just switch from cube to stick, and click OK. There we go. Then I'll take all of the smaller sticks, and then Shift select the main stick last, and then hit Control P and parent to object. And then for this one as well, take all of the smaller sticks, then Shift select the main stick, Control P to parent, set parent to object, and then I'll take both of these arms, Shift select two of them, Shift select the main part of the body to make that the active object, and again Control P, set parent to object. All right, now if you don't like these little dashed lines here in the viewport, you can also go to the Overlays menu and turn off relationship lines. I often like to have that off, but if you forget that you have these parent-child relationships, then it can make things very confusing. If you're moving things around and other things are also moving, you might want to keep those on if you're not familiar with working that way. Lastly, we're not going to cover any materials in this course because there will also be an entirely different course for the fundamentals of materials, but just to make our modeling a little bit nicer to look at in the viewport, what we can do is select an object, go to the Materials tab and click New, and for this one, I'll call it Hat. And I'll completely ignore the surface for now and just look at the viewport display and take that down to a bit of a dark gray or a black. Then I can take this brim of the hat and also choose the hat material. Then I can select a snowball, add a snow material by clicking the plus button, setting the viewport display all the way to white, and then shift selecting the other objects that we want to add the snow material to. And then over in the drop-down menu here in the materials, choose copy material to selected. Oh, we can also use that for the ground as well. So we can use the material drop-down this time and choose snow. And then let's make a new material for the buttons. Let's also make that black. I'll choose that for the other eye as well. Then let's make a carrot material, and I'll make that orange. Pretty bright, and to make it less shiny, I can increase the roughness. And lastly, one more for the sticks. I'll call that stick. Make it a dark brown, and then select all of the other sticks. I just use B to box select there, and then shift select this last stick. Over in the materials, use the drop down and copy material to selected. And there we go. Now we have our snowman. I realized that as far as modeling goes, this was about as basic as you can possibly get, but that was the point. We talked about some of the most important tools in object mode and practiced some good habits like organizing the scene and modeling to scale. So now that we've got that down, then in the next video, we'll dive back into edit mode.